It was a warm summer night in one of LA's most exclusive neighborhoods where mansions lined the streets and lives appeared perfect from the outside. But inside one of these homes, a family's world was about to be torn apart. Two brothers, once living a life most could only dream of, found themselves in the middle of a storm. One that had been brewing behind closed doors for years. Behind the wealth, the success, and the appearances was a darkness no one could see. Hello everyone and welcome to That's My Opinion. I am Bacon Bears and today we're diving into one of the most infamous and what I believe tragic crime stories in American history. The case of two brothers who shocked the nation with their brutal actions and the intense trials that followed, I should say. Netflix has released a new documentary shedding fresh light on the events that tore apart one of LA's wealthiest families, revealing disturbing secrets and complex emotions that still leave people divided today. In this video, we'll break down the documentary, we'll explore key moments, and discuss the impact of this high-profile case that continues to captivate audiences decades later. If you like what you see here, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. Sunday, August 20th, 1989, a frantic 911 call was made, and on the other end, a man screamed in terror, "Someone killed my parents." The address? 722 North Elm Drive, Beverly Hills. By 11:47 p.m., the police arrived at the scene, and what they found would become one of the most disturbing sights the department had ever witnessed. Inside the den of this multi-million-dollar home were two bodies, brutally massacred in a vicious and horrifying manner. Outside, two sons stood utterly devastated, screaming in anguish as their world completely fell apart before them. Who could have committed such a heinous crime in one of the safest neighborhoods in America during the 1980s? There was no forced entry, no sign of a struggle, and nothing had been stolen. But even more puzzling was all the shotgun shell casings had mysteriously disappeared. The documentary claims that Erik and Lyle Menendez returned home from a movie only to walk into the den to find their parents brutally slain. By the time the police arrived, the brothers were hysterical and completely inconsolable, almost to the point of seeming like they were overacting. But it couldn't have possibly been the boys. Not in Beverly Hills, not in 90210. This is the heart of the American dream, one of the safest and most elite zip codes in the country. It's a place for the rich, the wealthy, the famous, and crimes like this just don't happen here. In a 2024 interview, Erik reflects that if the police had treated the brothers as suspects from the start, they would have been arrested immediately. He had the shotgun shells in his car, he had no alibi, and they had gun residue on their hands, which would have been found had their hands been tested. Erik admits that he was so mentally fragile at this point that he would have cracked under the pressure of them asking him or pressing him with any questions. He states that he regretted the crime almost as soon as it happened, but because this type of crime was nearly unheard of in such a wealthy and safe area, the police initially treated the brothers as victims rather than suspects. At 4:20 a.m., the police interview Erik, who claimed that when he encountered the den, he specifically remembered that the TV wasn't loud. He said, "It was weird. I walked in. The TV wasn't very loud." And the detective immediately interjects and says, "That TV was really loud." And that's, to me, in my opinion, likely because of the shotguns. If two 12-gauge shotguns were fired multiple times in a closed room without ear protection, it would have severely impacted the hearing. I don't know if you've ever shot a firearm, but they are loud. Erik also mentions seeing smoke in the room and smelling gunpowder, which would have been completely impossible by the time the brothers claimed to have arrived, because gun smoke dissipates almost immediately. A reporter in the documentary states that he met with the boys on October 22nd of 1989, and the boys were laughing, and they were wearing tennis whites, and they were joking, and they were tan, and they were just living their best life. And they were doing it inside of the house where their parents were slaughtered. Lyle definitely took control over the situation. He spoke majority of the time. He was calm, cool, and collected. And he even himself says, and I quote, "I was used to keeping secrets." However, without the patriarch of the family to point them in the right direction, Lyle said that he felt quite lost And that's when everything started to fall apart. At the time of the murders, Lyle was 22 and Erik was 19. They had a memorial service at Princeton University Chapel where Lyle eulogized his parents and read a letter from his father. But it was odd that as this perfect family had been completely ripped apart in the most gruesome way, Lyle was so calm, not very emotional at all, in fact, is what his family remembers. His family member stated that he wanted to become like his father. He idolized his father. He wanted to start a business, become a businessman. Erik states that it was important to both of them that they preserve the family legacy. After the murders, the boys shopped. And I mean, just money everywhere. Spending an ungodly amount of money on clothes, watches, cars. Lyle buys a restaurant while Erik spends $50,000 on a tennis coach because he had decided that at that moment he wanted to go pro. And accusations flew that the brothers were just really enjoying themselves and having so much fun with their newfound wealth. Erik argued that was all just a cover-up for the crime and the pain that they were experiencing. However, in my opinion, when you step back and you look at the bigger picture, these were two young men, 19 and 22, coming into a significant amount of money, okay, for the first time. And as we progress through the documentary, it becomes clear that this might have been the first time that these boys ever felt a sense of freedom. And I'm not saying that their behavior is excusable, but I do believe, with hindsight, it is understandable. I also think that, yes, the boys were 19 and 22 at the time. Physically, mentally, I do not think that to be the case. As their brothers continued to spend their money, the police had to question whether that was the motive behind the crime. And at the time, they only had circumstantial evidence, but they would need something of substance to be able to move forward. And they would get that very soon. They discovered that the brothers had purchased guns using Lyle's roommate's stolen ID in San Diego. Authorities believed that 12-gauge Mossberg shotguns were used in the crime. Months after the murders, Lyle Menendez was arrested for the killings of Jose and Kitty Menendez. At the time, Erik was overseas and he flies back to surrender. Lyle expressed that the police could have simply called him and he would have gone into this station to turn himself in. However, he claimed that the police alerted the media to turn the arrest into a spectacle, surrounding his car with SWAT while cameras rolled as he was taken into custody. But even with it happening that way, Lyle said that he was actually relieved because it was just another secret that he didn't have to keep anymore. The police believed that the motive was a $14 million inheritance. This case went worldwide immediately. And everyone was in absolute disbelief that it was the sons. This family was wealthy. This family was good looking. This family was happy. The brothers initially pleaded not guilty, and Joanne Vandermullen, Kitty's sister, expressed her disbelief that the boys could even be involved, including Jose's mother, who was filmed during an interview insisting that police had the wrong people in custody. Erik revealed that he couldn't bring himself to tell the family that he had committed the crime. But even worse, he couldn't imagine explaining why he committed the crime. Lyle emphasized the importance of not tarnishing their father's reputation. Emotionally, Lyle was much stronger than Erik. Erik was a wreck. And now they face the daunting challenge of navigating jail alone, having barely managed to navigate normal life up until that point. Every aspect of their lives have been completely controlled. On June 14th of 1993, 3 years later, jury selection began for the Menendez case, which had turned into an absolute media circus. Reporters recognized that this trial could make or break their careers, and the jurors were all well aware of the case details despite being instructed not to discuss it. And thanks to extensive news coverage in the news and the tabloids, this case was everywhere. What I don't understand is why the trial wasn't moved to ensure that the brothers had a fair trial. Everyone in LA knew about them. You couldn't turn on your TV without hearing their names. And it was hard to believe that any juror could enter this trial without some sort of bias. This was the first televised celebrity trial on a brand new little network called Court TV, and it was captivating television. It's set in luxurious Beverly Hills. The cast was not only good looking and wealthy, but they were also capable of murder. It had all the elements that made America absolutely salivate. When Lyle is first asked about jail, he actually says that it's easier than living life at home, which I think is a very weighted statement in itself. Everyone involved in this case became an overnight celebrity. There was Leslie Abramson, Eric's lawyer, known for her sharp wit and described as pure dynamite. Then there was Jill Lansing, Lyle's attorney, who was gentle, soft-spoken, and empathetic, clearly someone who genuinely cared. Presiding over the trial was Judge Stanley Weisberg, who had also served as the judge in the Rodney King trial. And if you ever want to discuss that, I'd be more than happy to dive into it. But given the outcome of that trial, tensions were extremely high, and rightfully so. But the judicial system needed to demonstrate to the public that it could be trusted to make fair decisions. There was Pamela Bozanich, the prosecutor, who I have mixed feelings about. I believe she did her job and aimed to prosecute the brothers to the fullest extent of the law, which is her job, absolutely. And she certainly has the personality traits that can make her a very successful prosecutor. However, I also sense that even after all these years later, she seems a bit bitter about losing the case. I find it hard to believe that there's no part of her that can take any of the brothers' testimonies into consideration. Not just during the trial, but 33 years later. Like, there's no part of you that's like, maybe. She also states that the only reason she's doing this interview right now in 2024 is because of how Kitty was treated. Not only by Jose, but also by the boys. And then she was slaughtered inside of her own home. As the opening statements began, the prosecution expressed confidence in their evidence. They revealed that on September 8th, just 19 days after the murders, a life insurance policy worth $650,000 was paid out to the brothers. The prosecution aimed to prove to the jury that Lyle and Erik had premeditated this murder for financial gain. The defense opening began with Jill Lansing, who was Lyle's lawyer, whose focus really shifted from whether the boys committed the crime to why they committed the crime. She emphasized that they acted out of fear of their parents, and Lansing discussed the abuse Lyle endured at the hands of Jose, portraying him as a violent man and a complete monster who, and I quote, reveled in his sadism. She also goes in to tell a story that in 1986, when Kitty discovered Jose's 8-year affair, she left behind suicide notes and even threatened to poison her whole family. Lyle believed that these were two parents capable of taking the lives of their children. Leslie Abramson, Eric's lawyer, goes on to explain about a lifetime of abuse at the hands of both of his parents and how he could no longer take it. He only saw one way out, and this was it. The Menendez family, by all accounts, was seen as the perfect family. They were wealthy, good-looking, often photographed together, smiling, enjoying family activities. However, it doesn't take much for this seemingly perfect house of cards to come crashing down. Let's travel back in time to 1944, Havana, Cuba. Jose Menendez was born into an elite family filled with doctors, lawyers, very successful people who lived a very successful, socialite, rich life. But the revolution in Cuba changed everything, and they had to flee for their lives. And this family came to America with absolutely nothing. And now I have to tell you, along with this documentary and doing extensive research on this case and these people, I have a better chance of winning the lottery than I do at finding one person on the internet who has one kind thing to say about Jose Menendez. He has been described over the years as, and I quote, controlling, aggressive, inappropriate, and a monster. And that's not even from his sons. Kitty was described as glamorous, exotic, beautiful, fiery, and she had dreams. She was very driven. However, Jose had other plans for this former beauty queen. He expected her to be a stay-at-home mother and wife, just as society had dictated. Jose was wildly successful. He ran the company Hertz, and they... It's amazing to me, all of this. And they actually tell a story about how they were making a commercial, and Jose hires another very famous and powerful man in America, and that was a little man named O.J. Simpson, which I would also love to cover because that case. Jose was also the head of RCA Records, where he worked with artists like Hall & Oates, Dolly Parton, but most importantly, the band Menudo. I have to admit that I found the documentary about Roy Roseo, a former member of Menudo, extremely hard to watch. But to give you a quick synopsis, Roy Roseo was a member of Menudo, a boys band whose members were typically between 12 and 16 years old, with new members who replaced those who aged out at 16. Why was the age 16? I don't know. There were serious allegations of abuse involving the band's producer, Eduardo Diaz. In the documentary, Roy shares a story about how Eduardo brought him to the Menendez home where he met the brothers, and then he was allegedly assaulted by Jose Menendez. The first person we see on the stand in the documentary is Dr. L. Jerome Oziel, who was there for the prosecution side. For some context, Erik was in trouble for burglaries when he was underage, and his lawyer sent him to see a psychologist. Allegedly, Jose was very careful about which doctor Erik could see. Erik claims that Jose would only allow Dr. Oziel to see him if he signed a document stating that the doctor would hand over all of Erik's sessions to Jose, which, according to Erik, the doctor did. If that's true, that is so deeply troubling. Knowing that his therapist would share his sessions with his abuser would understandably prevent Erik from opening up about his actions. What's causing him to do this? Why is he feeling so angry? Why does he have to take risky behavior? Well, he can't tell the therapist, can he? How could you trust a therapist who is ethically obligated to keep secrets for you when that therapist was handing over his vulnerabilities to the very person causing him harm? However, the reason Dr. Oziel was on the stand after that was because after the murders, Erik decided to see him again. He didn't know where to turn or what to do. He was experiencing suicidal ideations, and he needed to speak to someone who could help him. And Dr. Oziel noted that when he saw Erik, he appeared agitated and depressed. But during this session, Erik admitted to Dr. Oziel that he and Lyle had taken the lives of their parents. He explained that he acted against them due to the abuse he had endured from Jose, and he stated that Kitty's death was essentially a mercy killing. According to Erik, she was miserable and emotionally incapable of moving on with her life. Additionally, he believed that she would be a witness. Dr. Oziel asked Erik to bring in Lyle and told them that they would have to confess to the crimes and they would have to do it on tape. But he said he was threatened by Lyle. However, Lyle will tell you that that's not true. And this doctor, of course, decided to help Erik in the most professional way that he knew how. And that was to record their sessions, make tapes, and use them as blackmail. He's a doctor. Oh, and he also told his wife about everything. Oh, and he told his girlfriend about Erik's admission. This guy. The prosecution should have just left him off the stand. But don't worry, I'll give you a second to process all that. The girlfriend of Dr. Oziel was a woman named Judalon Smith, and she ends up going to the police because she claims, this guy gets even worse, don't you worry, that Jerome Oziel drugged her, held her hostage, and also assaulted her. It is important to note that Judalon was also previously a client of Dr. Oziel, which is also highly unethical. Yeah. I read some statements online. I tried to find what he was doing now. Articles will tell you that he got his license stripped, and he will tell you that he let his license phase out so that he could do something else to become super successful. I don't know which is which. I would hope that they stripped this man's license if this stuff is true, because yuck. The documentary at this point mentions that 3 years before the trial, the LA County Sheriff's Office made a public statement claiming that Lyle and Erik Menendez had attempted to escape jail. And this gave the authorities the opportunity to search their cells. And in Erik's cell, they found a 17-page letter written by Lyle, which not only admitted to the crimes, but also alluded to a lifetime of abuse. Although Lyle had asked Erik to destroy the letter, Erik couldn't bring himself to do it because at the time, the letter held deep significance for him. Lyle wanted to protect the family's reputation and avoid exposing their secrets, especially those regarding their father. However, this discovery might have been a blessing in disguise. Had the boys not come forward with this information, it would have appeared as though their sole motive was monetary. And later, after they make the discovery in Erik's cell, I think about 2 weeks later is what the documentary said, the LA County Sheriff's Office comes out again and recants, takes back their previous statement about the brothers trying to escape. And I quote in an article, after a thorough investigation, no credible evidence was found to support claims that the Menendez brothers were planning or attempting to escape from custody. LOL, JK. Can you do that? Dr. William Vicari, who is a defense expert, was called to help figure out why the crime had occurred. He tried to talk with Erik, but essentially he got nowhere. Erik was just so wildly out of control. Sobbing, he wouldn't open up about anything. The doctor goes on to say, I tried to control him. I tried to get him to say something and nothing. And Erik makes a really great point. He talks about, if Dr. Jerome Oziel did all of this stuff to me and was so unethical, how can I trust you to do your job? John Conti is another defense expert who was called to evaluate the case as it potentially involved child abuse. However, Lyle refuses to speak to him because he says he would rather go to prison than tell anybody the truth. So Conti starts talking to family members. And that's when we hear a story from Diane Vandermolen, their cousin. She recounted an incident involving Lyle as a baby. His father, Jose, placed him on the counter and told him to jump, assuring him that he would catch him. And as any child would, Lyle trusted his father and he leaped. But Jose stepped back, allowing him to fall directly to the floor. And then Jose stood over him and told Lyle, you can never trust anyone. Hearing this message from somebody you're supposed to trust the most is so horrific and disgusting. Why did you have kids? Like, what was the point of that? Jose's brother-in-law testified that unprovoked, Jose hit Lyle at 5 years old with a closed fist. Jose's sister testified that when Erik was just 2 years old, their father, Jose, made him hold onto a bar and held it up to see how long he could endure it without crying. And when this 2-year-old boy naturally began to cry, had a natural human reaction, Jose would then scream at him for showing emotion. She also spoke about how Jose was proud of Lyle when he was competing with the cousins, because Lyle had to be the best. Jose's kids had to be the best. But he was even more proud of Lyle, that he wouldn't cry no matter how rough they were playing. Set your standards high, I guess. It was stated that love had to be earned from Jose, and the only way that you could get his love is by going through pain. And I have to tell you, at this moment, watching this documentary, seeing these pictures in the courtroom of these boys as babies, I was pissed. I have children this age. I don't understand. I don't understand. I could never in a million years treat them that way or stand by and watch them be treated that way. In 2024, the prosecutor remarked on how it was nearly impossible to find anyone who could say one nice thing about Jose Menendez. And she stated, and I quote, my favorite quote of the documentary, the loss of Jose Menendez in my mind was an actual plus for mankind. Agree. 10 out of 10. 1,000 out of 10. She called him an absolute monster, but she also added, he raised 2 sons who were capable of murder. Erik expresses how much he loves his parents, how much he loved his parents, and saying that the media often gets it wrong, that the media argues that if he had truly loved them, he couldn't have done what he did. However, I personally believe that Erik does love them, but in the way that abuse victims often love the idea of who their abuser should be, rather than who they actually are. According to the Cleveland Clinic, victims' positive feelings toward their abusers are often a psychological response or coping mechanism developed to survive days, weeks, or even years of trauma and abuse. There's a statement that he makes in the documentary about his mother. I wanted her to love me. I wanted her to be happy with me. When Erik was asked to draw a picture about his home life, these pictures were really hard to look at. They were chaotic. They were aggressive. And he drew them while he was in his 20s, but it still had like a childlike feeling to them. There was a childlike quality to them. But the doctors knew that after he drew them, this was not about money. There's a point in the pictures that it was even depicted that there was assault. And honestly, looking at these drawings, it made me sick to my stomach. September 11th, 1993 is day 37 of the trial, and Lyle takes the stand. And he does not want to testify, which I completely understand. But I was surprised because usually defendants don't. So to me, this was a very interesting move. However, I do understand why, because you need every single piece of context that you can get to have a better understanding of why the boys did what they did. He starts off by talking about sports being important to him because it was important to his dad. And if Jose was happy, then Jose would love you. And they immediately out of the gate start asking about sexual contact. And as soon as they do, he is fidgety, he's uncomfortable, he starts tearing up. He has a visceral reaction to this question. And the cameras pan over to Erik, and you can see Erik crying and being consoled by his lawyer. Lyle goes on to tell a story about telling his mom about the abuse that he endured from Jose, and her response, allegedly from Lyle, is, and I quote, "Stop it. You're exaggerating. Your father has to punish you, but he loves you." I'm so mad. As a mother, I am... He also goes on to tell a story about when he was somewhere in between 6 to 8 years old, that he had abused his brother the same way that his father had abused him. And Lyle apologizes to Erik on the stand, and Erik loses it. This is not anything that they've ever spoken about before. And the two of them inside that room are just breaking down. It is important to note that often children will go on to abuse their peers or their siblings because they are taught in a way that these behaviors are appropriate. They have no idea the concept of right and wrong of abuse at that age. He's being shown something by his father. Lyle's testimony had everyone in the courtroom completely emotional. But the judge tells the boys' lawyers that a history of abuse does not make legal defense for murder. And I understand that because there are people who go through an entire lifetime of abuse and never go on to, quote unquote, punish their abusers. However, it does make the situation more understandable. And in the argument of was it first degree premeditated murder or manslaughter, I do think that a history of abuse is important. The attorneys have decided that they have to convince the jury that the brothers feared for their lives, which means that they have to prove self-defense or imperfect self-defense. Erik takes the stand and he talks about the summer of 1989, which is the same year that they killed their parents, that he was actively being assaulted by Jose at 19 years old, still. And this abuse started when Erik was 6 years old. He admits that the shootings were a result of telling Lyle of what was going on with him and Jose. And Erik is a complete mess on the stand. Erik says that Jose told him that if he told anyone about what was going on, that it would stop. And the lawyer asked him, "Do you want it to stop?" And Erik said, "No, I didn't. I didn't want it to stop because that was the only time that my father was kind to me. That was the only time that he felt like Jose loved him." But he does go on to tell a story about one time that he did say no to Jose, to which Jose stormed out of the room and came back with a knife. He held it to his neck and said, "The next time I'll kill you." And as a child, you trust your parents. You believe them. And I'm sure he believed that to be true. There's so many details in this documentary that I won't repeat because it's absolutely repulsive. Like this, listening to these boys on the stand tell these stories, it was really hard to listen to. Extremely hard to listen to. But if you want to hear about it, you can go watch it for yourself. It is a great watch. It is a good documentary, but it's heavy. It's very heavy. I think if this had happened in 2024, the outcome would be completely different. I also believe that the case in 1993 would have also gone very differently if it had involved the Menendez sisters as opposed to the Menendez brothers. In the 1980s and the 1990s, the idea that Jose Menendez could be a monster or that the boys could have been victims was inconceivable. And we know so much more now and are far more open to discussing difficult topics. And this case not only dealt with abuse, but incest and also homosexuality, which in 1989 was still incredibly taboo. Even today, society struggles to fully acknowledge that males can be victims of abuse. According to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, 81% of women and 43% of men have reported experiencing some form of sexual assault or harassment, and it doesn't surprise me that the number for men is lower. Societally, when women come forward, we praise them and we tell them how strong they are. But when a man does that, he's considered weak, which is not the case at all. Any victim of any crime who comes forward is incredibly brave. And I believe that sometimes saying things out loud is one of the hardest things that we can do. Speaking about an experience brings it into existence, making it undeniably real, which can be extremely difficult to face. This site also states that 1 in 4 men have experienced sexual assault between the ages of 11 and 17. 1 in 4. The media at the time absolutely ripped these boys to shred. SNL, Jay Leno, making skits about the trial, and other media outlets asking the incredibly simple question of why didn't they just leave? Joan Vandermolen actually called the Jay Leno show to protest them making fun of the boys, and they responded with, "They are public property, and we can do what we want." Allegedly, that's what she said. I wonder if people ever look back on the work that they were a part of with like new eyes and new information, and if they're ever regretful of like what they found funny at the time. Diane Vandermolen, their cousin, testified that at 8 years old, Lyle told her about the abuse, to which she did the right thing. In turn, she went to Kitty, and she told Kitty Menendez, Lyle's mother, about what was going on. Kitty doesn't believe her. She just takes Lyle by the arm and takes him out of the room. And that's the end of that. Erik finally gets to the age of 18, and his only options in his eyes are suicide or Stanford. But Jose would pull the rug out from under Erik, and he told him that not only would he be going to UCLA, but that Erik would continue to live in the house with him. Another reason I'm sure he was devastated was because Lyle was off at college. So I'm sure Erik thought that he was going to be able to do that as well. And that's when Erik reached his breaking point and confided in Lyle and told him all about the abuse that he had endured at the hands of Jose Menendez. And that's when Lyle Menendez had decided that enough was enough. Lyle decided that he was going to confront Jose, admitting to him that he knew about absolutely everything. And not only was he going to go to the police, but he was going to tell their entire family. And Jose allegedly responded with, "What I do with my son is none of your business." At this point, Lyle said that Kitty admitted to knowing about the abuse. And if that's true, I can't imagine the absolute betrayal that these boys felt. The person who is supposed to love you the most, protect you, did none of these things. Her sister even says, "I don't understand how she didn't protect them." And honestly, I don't understand it either. Sunday, August 20th, 1989, Lyle fights with Kitty, while Jose tells Erik to go upstairs to his room and wait for him. And that's when the boys knew that something was going to happen. So the Menendez brothers got their guns, and they decided to attack their parents. At that moment, they had the thought, kill or be killed. They loaded their 12-gauge Mossberg shotguns, went to the den, and they just started unloading on their parents. After the shootings, they then got into their car, they drove to the movie theater, they bought tickets, and they disposed of the weapons. They drove back to the house, and they called 911. Lyle and Erik are absolutely hysterical, and so we circle back to where our story begins. After 56 witnesses, the defense finally rests. The defense had to prove imperfect self-defense. Now, imperfect self-defense is the defendant believes that he or she is in imminent danger, as opposed to self-defense, where a defendant is in danger, and they use reasonable force to protect themselves or their family members. Now, it needs to be understood that people who endure years of trauma or abuse are often in a constant state of fight or flight. For me, it's not unreasonable to think that the brothers actually thought that they were in danger and that they knew Erik was in immediate danger because Jose had told Erik to go to his room and wait for him. And both boys knew what that meant. December 8th of 1993 is closing arguments. The prosecution states that the boys could have left at any time. They were 18, they didn't need to live in the house. And in 2024, the prosecutor says that she still believes that their defense was fabricated. The defense is fighting for the lesser charge, which would be manslaughter. It wasn't about guilty or not guilty because the brothers had already admitted to the crime, but it was about murder or manslaughter. Was this premeditated, or did the boys truly fear for their lives and their safety? One of the jurors who was doing an interview in 2024 said that when they made everybody in the jury room show hands, all the men wanted first-degree murder, and none of the women did. The men didn't understand that a father could do this to his sons. But the woman goes on to say something so interesting, that as women, we're more empathetic. We're more likely to understand abuse. And when she said that, I was like, yeah. The jury tells the judge that they're at an impasse, and the judge says, go back in and try again. And from what I could find online, these jurors deliberated for a total combined 44 days. 19 days for Erik and 25 days for Lyle. On January 8th of 1994, 51 days after closing arguments, the jury gives their verdict. And they say, we remain hopelessly deadlocked, which declares a mistrial for the brothers. Now, when a mistrial occurs, the case can either be retried or dismissed. And essentially, this is crushing to the brothers because they have to live this moment over again. The Los Angeles District Attorney Gil Garcetti stepped up to the podium declaring that they would retry the Menendez brothers, this time seeking the ultimate punishment, the death penalty. But in June of 1994, the media's attention was seized by another shocking arrest, one that would overshadow everything. This time, it was a celebrity, the infamous O.J. Simpson, actor, athlete, and once a face of success. O.J. had even run a campaign for none other than Jose Menendez. The irony is chilling, honestly. Years earlier, the Menendez boys had met O.J. in their home, a connection forged through their father's Hertz commercials. Another devastating blow to the Menendez case is on October 3rd of 1995. O.J. Simpson is found not guilty of the murders of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman. Leslie Abramson, Erik's attorney, knew that this was going to be devastating for the boys. The courts desperately needed a win, and she believed that the boys were going to be payback. October 11th, 1995, they start the retrial of the Menendez brothers, and we see in the documentary a really gross Matt Lauer with hair, because he's a scumbag. But I digress. We found out that the second trial is going to be wildly different than the first one, and not in a good way. Judge Weisberg was embarrassed about the first trial and all the things being said about him, and he was not going to be embarrassed again. So the judge states that he will limit the number of experts and witnesses to support claims of abuse, which in my opinion is their entire case. Weisberg also rules that the parents' alleged abuse of the brothers was completely irrelevant. So there's no evidence of abuse. Lyle doesn't testify. The family can't testify. Erik can't talk about any of the abuse he's endured. Oh, that's right. And the jury only had the options of first-degree murder or nothing. The prosecution doesn't have to prove motive. They just have to prove that a crime was committed. We already know that a crime was committed. So at this point, why are we even having a second trial? It took the jury less than a week, which, of course, what do they need to argue? And Gil Garcetti is thrilled, clapping, pumping his fist in the air for this so-called win. But when nothing is set up for failure, can you really celebrate? I guess to him, it's just another tally on the side of a so-called success, I guess. The news called it a much-needed victory for the DA after losing the O.J. Simpson case. And winner or loser, these are people's real lives. And no matter what your opinions are about the brothers, in America, We deserve and should be granted a fair trial with all the evidence presented to a jury of our peers. That's what we get. And you win some and you lose some. But unfortunately, in this case, I think that the Menendez brothers were collateral damage to some people in their careers. The brothers were sentenced to life without parole, and the jury decided that they could not put them to death. The boys go on to do a desperate interview with Barbara Walters, and they talk about how important it was to stay together in prison. And they said that it was almost their plea, as they did not want to be separated. But they were, in fact, separated. And that was the last time that they would ever see each other for a very long time. I know that it wasn't long ago that they were actually reconnected, but they have traveled this journey mostly alone. And at this point, Jose isn't there to control every aspect of their life. And the boys who were once able to support each other and understand what the other was going through have nothing. And honestly, I think it's just truly tragic from start to finish. The brothers tried to appeal to the federal court, which was denied, and then that's it. They show a clip of Oprah. Oprah. I have thoughts. At the beginning of this documentary, they show her absolutely berating the boys. And at the end of the documentary, they show a clip of her doing a groundbreaking show about male child abuse, where these men held up pictures of them at the time that they were abused. And Lyle goes on to say that this was 16 years after he had testified. But she was the one to, and I quote, lift the veil off of sexual abuse of boys. And as I do believe that that show did some good, I think it could have also done some good 16 years beforehand. Lyle talks about how he's received countless letters from people admitting to their abuse, and they are finally strong enough to come forward because Lyle had told his own story. He even talks about how he received letters from professionals, police, doctors, but also the prisoners started coming to him. And because of all of that, he has now dedicated his life to survivors. In 2020, the Menendez brothers are on TikTok and they go viral. They are everywhere. And I think that this is a clear indication that Gen Z understands abuse differently. Even millennials, as myself, we are more open about it. We're more aggressive about it. We are supportive. And as I don't think we are anywhere near where we need to be, I also think we are worlds away from what we thought about it in 1989. That's for sure. Erik brings up a point that he doesn't ever want his crime to be minimized or diminished, which I agree, because I do think that there are plenty of survivors who go through the years of trauma that don't make the same choices. And I do think that that is very important to remember. No matter what we think about the abuse, taking the life of someone else is never the answer. And at the end of the day, a choice was made. In 2023, both Erik and Lyle Menendez are seeking to vacate their murder convictions in light of new evidence. And as October 3rd of 2024, and I'm writing the script and filming this on October 15th of 2024, LA District Attorney George Gaskin said that they are reviewing and will decide if it warrants a resentencing or a retrial. I believe that the Menendez brothers committed a heinous crime, and they absolutely deserved to serve time in prison. But if I had been on the jury during the first trial, faced with the choice between premeditated murder and manslaughter, I don't believe that I would have convicted them of premeditated murder. When you have so many witnesses coming forward on behalf of the boys and absolutely none for their parents, that says something. And as we reflect on the Menendez case, it's easy to get lost in the shock of the crime, the wealth, and the scandal. But beyond the headlines, this is a story of deep pain, of children who endured unimaginable trauma behind the doors of a picture-perfect home. And it forces us to confront the darkness that can exist even in the most outwardly ideal families. The Menendez brothers made a terrible choice, but their story is a sobering reminder of how abuse, when left unchecked, can devastate lives. As uncomfortable as it may be, we need to continue having these conversations about abuse, about trauma, and about the hidden battles people face. Because until we do, families like the Menendez will remain silent, trapped in their pain, and we will be left asking ourselves how we missed the signs. This case isn't just about two brothers. It's about recognizing that predators don't fit a mold and that victims can truly be anyone. It's about breaking the cycle, speaking up, and refusing to turn a blind eye to the suffering of others. That is what we need to take away from the story, and it's a lesson that we can't afford to forget. I'm Bacon Bears, and that's my opinion on the Menendez Brothers documentary. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.